so you have a longer version of what I say. Ali Vaez is senior analyst on Iran in the International Crisis Group. He just did a report for the International Crisis Group, which is amazing, and he and Karim Sajjadpour put out a book on the nuclear program in Iran, which is equally, wonderful, and I recommend it strongly to you. And finally, Meir Javedanfar, I hope we'll be able to hear him. He's an Iranian politics lecturer, Interdisciplinary Center, Herzliya, and Iranian-Israeli Middle East Analyst. Meir, can you hear me? Okay, but I cannot hear you yet, so I will start with Ali and then move to you. The big question to all three of you, do you think that former President Rafsanjani was given somehow the green light to run, and then the rug was pulled from under his feet? Or did he know that he would be disqualified but wanted to test the regime?
Thank you, Haleh. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. I don't think that the green light was given to President Rafsanjani, but this was kind of last opportunity for him to put his mark on the system and on the regime that he himself was part of the team that created it. But I think for three main reasons, what came to pass during the past few weeks wasn't really a surprise. First, I think one of the perennial natures of the Islamic Republic is the fact that it's a very exclusionary system. If you think about it from day one, when an incongruous crowd of different groups with different political affiliations came together to oust the monarchy, then immediately after you had exclusion of almost everybody except the Islamists in 1979, and then the Islamists started to splinter and excluded others from within their group. And over time, I think exclusionary mechanisms were built into the electoral process. So you always have this phenomenon of insiders, outsiders in the Islamic Republic, which is known as khodi and ghair khodi in Persian. And the boundaries between insiders and outsiders have been nebulous and have been changing over time based on political realities on the ground. So that's number one. Again, the Guardian Council's very purpose is to filter out and weed out undesired candidates. Second reason that I think what came to pass wasn't a surprise is that this is a very sensitive election. It's the first presidential poll after the still disputed 2009 presidential election. And therefore, the system has decided for a very long time that this is going to be a highly managed, carefully guided competition. Nothing is going to be left to chances. Therefore, again, prevention is better than cure. Letting candidates who subscribe to alternative school of thoughts entering the game and then dealing with them down the road could be risky and difficult to manage. I think, from a cost-benefit point of view, curtailing the candidates is much easier than crowd control further down the road. And the Islamic Republic had that experience because in 1997 and 2009, they allowed the underdog candidate to run, underestimating that they would be able to marshal support, and they did, and it became a security challenge. And finally, I would say, the political establishment was quite frank about its electoral designs. Let's start with Mashai. Almost everybody in the political elite had demonized Mashai for the past 4 years. I think everyone, probably except President Ahmadinejad, knew that Mashai, as the leader of the deviant current, as he's known, doesn't stand a chance of becoming president or even running for president. In the case of Mr. Rafsanjani, I think it was more surprising because someone at his stature has never been disqualified. But again, look at what the Supreme Leader said after Rafsanjani registered. He said, there are some, alluding to Mr. Rafsanjani, among the candidates who want to take Iran backwards. Then the head of the Guardian Council said, vociferously attacked Mr. Rafsanjani because of his wealth and riding in a Mercedes-Benz. And finally, the Speaker of the Guardian Council, just one day before the results came out, mentioned that age is one of the criteria that we're considering in vetting the candidate. So again, if you put all of these elements together, I think it wasn't a surprise.
Meir, did you hear what Ali said? We shouldn't have been surprised. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Just wait a minute, wait. We go to Barbara and then try once more with you, Barbara.
Okay.
So
Meir, I'm so sorry. I would love to hear what you have to say. Haleh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I basically agree with Ali's analysis. I'm one of those who frankly did not get that excited about the Rafsanjani announcement at all. You know, in relative terms, he certainly looks better than a lot of the other candidates who are running, but he's always been a very controversial figure within Iran. He's been defeated for the parliament in 2000. He lost in 2005, which was the last time that he tried a comeback. Ali mentioned the commentary about Mercedes-Benz. I mean, his family is known to be one of the wealthiest in Iran, and it wasn't that wealthy when the revolution happened, certainly. I think that to put exaggerated hopes on him was always a mistake. That said, what's happened now is that a lot of the suspense, such as it might have been, has been taken out of this election. We have a group of candidates who are not terribly charismatic, who've all shown loyalty to the leader. And so I think the only remaining question for me, the real question for me, is what will Ahmadinejad do now that Mashai has also been disqualified? Will he or Mashai or others in their circle release the dossiers against the elite that they've been threatening to release for months, even years now? Will they foment some kind of disturbances? Or will they accept the ruling of the Guardian Council? And then when it comes to the actual election, how will the votes be counted? Because we now have, this is a system that's known for being bipolar, bifurcated, whatever you want to call it. It's actually more than that. It's certainly many, many centers of power. But now you have two organizations that are tasked with supervising the elections, the Interior Ministry and a new committee that has been appointed by the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, with 11 members that's supposed to oversee the elections and do the final tabulations. So I can imagine, this being Iran, that there still will be some sort of fight at the end over who counts the votes and will there be a second round? Will one candidate manage to eke past with more than 50%? And then also we have to see how the turnout is treated. Will it be an honest reflection or will it be an inflated toll? So that's what I'm looking to see now. I think the Rafsanjani episode was just a sort of little blip on the screen.
Meir, one last.
Hello.
Sure. I will be trying again and again. Should we think that Mr. Rafsanjani was an episode, it's over, and we should now try and focus on Mr. Jalili, who suddenly appeared on the political scene in Iran?
In terms of Mr. Rafsanjani, we were basically very much surprised that he was allowed. He put his name down on the list based on an interview his daughter Fatemeh gave to Sharq newspaper. She said that Ayatollah Rafsanjani at the last minute received a phone call at 5 o'clock, and immediately after that phone call, he went to put his name down to become a candidate. Now, taking into consideration that Ayatollah Rafsanjani has said before that he would only take part if he received at least the backing of the Supreme Leader, I think we all took it as a decision that yes, now Ayatollah Khamenei wants him to run, And there is hope for Rafsanjani. Now, whether he was going to win, it's another issue, but allowing Rafsanjani to run in the elections would have brought out, I think, a lot more genuine voters to the ballot box, and this would have been good for the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. Now, even if he wouldn't have been allowed to win, I think Ayatollah Khamenei is still very much interested in showing his own public and his own constituency and the world that, that people are voting in these elections. So, based on the advantages that Mr. Rafsanjani just participating would have brought to the Islamic Republic, I think some of us, including myself, became optimistic that, hey, there may be a chance here. And it almost did look like absolutely a surprise. Why? Because Mr. Rafsanjani, as Barbara quite rightly said, he lost, in the Majlis, then he lost in the presidential elections, and then in 2011 he also lost the Assembly of Experts. He lost it to Ayatollah Mahdavi Kani, and he couldn't even hold that anymore. And for a long time, the Expediency Council was almost becoming an irrelevant body by the president. Anybody who fell out with the president basically just went and joined the Expediency Council, and the president, who was supposed to join, according to the Constitution, to the Expediency Council, wasn't turning up. So I think in these, when you look at the things he lost, and then suddenly he turned up, I think we all thought that the Supreme Leader wants to include him because he does actually look like an alternative to the other people. In terms of Mr. Jalili, one of the reasons why from the beginning I've been looking at him, and I thought that he would be a viable candidate. I initially started Mr. Haddad Adel. He still may have a chance. But I think what's important, Mr. Jalili, is that he doesn't have a corrupt image, number one. Number two, he served in the office of the Supreme Leader. And this is, of course, the holiest of the holies in terms of political institutions in Iran. Per square meter, there is no other place in Iran which holds more political power. Of course, so that means he's in good connections with the Supreme Leader. He was close to Mr. Ahmadinejad, and he seems not, thankfully for him, he seems not to have the capability of Mr. Ahmadinejad to make enemies. Mr. Ahmadinejad, in terms of making enemies, was really a champion. But Jalili seems like somebody who's been able to work with the different factions within the conservative wing, and he doesn't look corrupt. But most importantly, he seems to be very much a loyal follower of the Supreme Leader. And when you put all these things together, for now, I think, yes, he definitely looks like somebody who has the chance to win the vote of the Supreme Leader, plus the other important bodies in the Islamic Republic with whom the Supreme Leader consults. This includes, of course, the Office of the Supreme Leader, Mr. Golpaygani, and his son Mujtaba, and Wahid Haqqanian, and others such as the head of the IRGC, such as General Ja'fari and Ayatollah Jannati of the Guardian Council. I think when you look at all these other bodies, it looks like that he would be, for now, it looks like the very suitable candidate.
Well, I'm not privy to what's happening inside Ayatollah Khamenei's office, and I think at this stage it's difficult to predict. I mean, it's always difficult to predict, but especially now. The list is going to shrink, probably. I think if you look at the conservative camp, it's likely that one or two people out of the 2+1 coalition, which is Velayati, Haddad, and Ghalibaf, will drop out. And if you look at, I mean, these are vaguely defined concepts, but if you look at the centrist camp, which is Qarazi, Rouhani, and Aref, probably one or two person will drop out. So the list will shrink. And I think then you will have a competition between, it's most likely going to be Rouhani, representing the center, more or less the reformist to a certain extent, and then the conservative camp, which is presented by Jalili and by the candidate of the 2+1. Now, if the candidate of the 2+1 is Velayati, then you will have an inter-conservative fight between the old guard of the Islamic Republic, represented by Velayati, and the new guard of the Islamic Republic, which is Jalili. If the candidate is Ghalibaf, I don't think Haddad really stands a chance. He didn't even succeed in getting in being selected as the head of the parliament. if Ghalibaf is the candidate of the 2+1, then you will have a competition within the new guard of the Islamic Republic. And this is my personal opinion, but I think Ghalibaf, Ahmadinejad, and Jalili all belong to the same generation, all belong to the new guard of the regime. Their formative experiences were the war and the revolution. They all were somehow connected to the military security organizations. And for me, Jalili is Ahmadinejad minus complacency, and Ghalibaf is Ahmadinejad plus competence. So at the end of the day, you really have a competition between forces that are loyal to the supreme leader. And I mean, again, if you look at the way elections work in Iran, they're not free and fair according to international standards. But once the Guardian Council filters out the undesirable candidates, I think from that point on, it's a genuine competition within this limited group of insiders. For me, any candidate that comes out of it, even if it's Jalili or Velayati, for example, the supreme leader would probably be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think the idea was to have not to have to commit fraud after the election. Sorry, what's that noise? The idea was not to have to commit fraud after the election. In Iran, the fraud takes place before the election when the Guardian Council decides who can run. So at least up until 2005, you did not have gross manipulation of the numbers after the election. We saw some of that in 2005, and we saw a lot more of that in 2009. So I agree. I think most likely the Supreme Leader will not tip his turban and anoint one of the conservatives. He would be happy certainly with Velayati, he would be happy with Jalili, he would be happy with Haddad Adel. With Ghalibaf perhaps a little bit less so, because I think Ghalibaf still has some elements of independence that might be frightening to the leader, frankly. But he certainly could live with that. I wanted to say one other word about Rafsanjani, though, before we move on from that, and that is, even though I don't think he was necessarily the great savior for the Islamic Republic, there were some interesting arguments that came out in the press after he was disqualified that suggests that Khamenei did see him as too much of a risk. Kehan said that the Guardian Council had saved Rafsanjani from foreign plotters who would have taken advantage of the election. And then another newspaper, Khorasan, said that if they'd let Rafsanjani run, he would have been defeated, but that would have led to claims of vote rigging and more disturbances. So it was sort of interesting to look at the reasoning that was used after the fact to keep him out.
If I can interject with just one point. In terms of the people who are standing, if you look at Haddad Adel, Mr. Jalili, and Mr. Velayati, all three are connected in one way or another with the Supreme Leader, with the office of the Supreme Leader. Mr. Velayati is the advisor of the Supreme Leader in Foreign Affairs. Mr. Haddad Adel, his family, so he's not just connected to the office, he's also connected to his house, you could say almost. His daughter is married to Mujtaba Khamenei, who some people believe could replace Ayatollah Khamenei. He's one of the supposed candidates that we're looking at for possible replacement. And of course, when we look at Mr. Jalili, so when you have these three people, Velayati, Jalili, and Haddad Adel, all are somehow connected to the office of the Supreme Leader. So this looks like more and more that it's actually a post which is going to come from within the office of the Supreme Leader. And I think this is actually, you could say it's the first time in the Islamic Republic.
I'm personally intrigued because if the argument that Meir makes, sounds plausible, then why do we have to drag in Jalili in the last minute? Basically, you had Haddad, you had Velayati, so why go and get, and if you wanted to bring somebody, you should look for someone who has had some more experience. If you look at the biography of Mr. Jalili, he has been in the foreign ministry, he has been a nuclear negotiator, but he hasn't run anything. At least Ahmadinejad was the governor of a small province and the mayor of Tehran. So why go for Jalili unless the Supreme Leader decided that we need a technocrat as the future president? Could that be?
Well, I think what we've seen is the marginalization of the office of president. We're going back almost to the way the presidency was when Khamenei was president back in the 80s, when the prime minister position existed in the system, and that was much more important. We've heard, since last year, reports that they might actually eliminate a directly elected presidency entirely and have the parliament choose the president. So I think it's part of the marginalization of the office, subsuming it within the supreme leader's purview. And, if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter, who the president is. More important probably would be who are the ministers and whether you can get some more competent technocrats in to run the economy. Certainly that's been a big problem under Ahmadinejad.
But I think, Haleh, the premise of your question, that it's Khamenei who would tell Jalili that now you have to run. I personally think Khamenei, the other way around it works, meaning that Khamenei would...
not stop.
Yes, but encouraging them to run, I think it's unlikely. I think Jalili did something really interesting in terms of showing his loyalty to the Supreme Leader, and that was detaching himself from Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. Jalili was expected to become the Steadfast Front, which is headed by, or the spiritual leader of Steadfast Front is Ayatollah Misbah. It was expected that he will be their candidate, but Lankarani became their candidate. And when Jalili went to Qom, he didn't even visit Ayatollah Misbah. And it was a message that he's uniquely and solely loyal to the Supreme Leader. And again, as I said, I think if you look at, and this is part of the irony of this whole story, if you look at Rafsanjani's 2 elections, there were among the most uncontested elections in the history of the Islamic Republic, and it was the same model. A group of people who were all loyal to the system, and whoever would come out of it would be a good choice for the system. And I think, again, if you look at the list of 8 candidates, 6 of them are direct appointees of the Supreme Leader. I mean, all of them are loyal to him, but 6 of them are currently his direct appointees. So at the end of the day, the final choice is with whoever is better at the battle of hearts and minds of the Supreme Leader primarily, and then the population.
I think one of the issues that, if I can interject for a moment, I think one of the issues for the Supreme Leader, the most important issue, is after having given so much of his credibility and support to Mr. Ahmadinejad, and to see the way he behaved in 2001 when he challenged basically fired the intelligence minister who was the appointee of the Supreme Leader. I think Ayatollah Khamenei is looking for somebody who's not going to create so much division within the regime. The regime is already divided. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think Jalili looks, for now at least, one of the more stable candidates, one of the most stable investments for the Supreme Leader to make, because he invested his stock in Ahmadinejad and it doesn't look well. For now, anybody who's going to criticize Ahmadinejad vicariously, they're criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei's decision, because Ahmadinejad was there because of Ayatollah Khamenei's support. Ahmadinejad, a lot of his economic policies, they were not just his. He was carrying out the wishes of the Supreme Leader. So I think it's going to be very important for the Supreme Leader to choose somebody who's going to follow his path and not to create challenges regarding his decisions. But I think, unfortunately for the regime, this is a kind of short-term thinking, because while it's important that there is no challenging of the Supreme Leader's decision, what's far more important, what's happening to the economy. If I can just give you a very interesting point that was raised by Mr. Hashemi Rafsanjani after he decided not to run in a recent meeting 2 days ago. I'm reading an article from Saham News. He basically says, with the mountain of problems that we have, how does the government expect to raise the wages of the workers by 25%? The government owes the banks and the contractors 500,000 milliard toman. If my math still serves me right, 500,000 milliard toman is 500 trillion toman. And 500 trillion toman, if we divide it by the 2,000 toman per dollar of the government official rate, that's $250 billion that the government owes to the banks and to the contractors. And Mr. Rafsanjani is quoting officials who came to the Expediency Council and told him about this figure. As you know, and I think this is going to be the major issue. Ayatollah Khamenei
One
needs
quick
somebody
Okay,
who's
I
going
wanted to
be
ask Meir a
accountable
question.
to issues.
Yeah, Meir, it's Barbara here. I wanted to ask you, do you think that Ahmadinejad is going to behave himself during the election campaign and allow it to proceed calmly and smoothly?
It's a great question, Barbara. Difficult to say, to be honest with you. Ahmadinejad is a very erratic person. You know, on the one hand, he denied the Holocaust, and on the other hand, his right-hand man, Mishai, said that we don't have a problem with the people of Israel, and Ahmadinejad supported him. He didn't stop him. He's a very unpredictable person. I think this is just my opinion, I think Ahmadinejad would want to raise his voice, but I think it's possible that before the elections, because it's such a sensitive time, he may get a strong warning from the Supreme Leader not to do it. But if he doesn't, then I think it's possible. It's possible.
Thank you. Ali?
It's just a two-finger on what my good friend Meir is saying. I slightly disagree with him in the sense that if you look from the candidacy of Rafsanjani until now, I don't think that the Supreme Leader wants to be seen as directly involved in this process. He doesn't want to enter the fray directly and openly. And this is part of the experience of Ahmadinejad era. I mean, this is an evolving system that's part of the experience of 2009. And actually, I think the reason that Rafsanjani said that I would run only if the Supreme Leader would accept was a sly way of entering him, bringing him into the fray. Because if Khamenei had accepted, then the Guardian Council couldn't reject Rafsanjani's candidacy. And if he hadn't accepted, he could blame it on Khamenei. And Khamenei, in a very sly, calculative way that it is his modus operandi, decided not to have any opinion on this. So when Rafsanjani, my understanding is that when Rafsanjani called the office, they said that the Supreme Leader doesn't have any opinion on this. And that was taken as a green light. And even now, I mean, it's starting to become conventional wisdom in Washington, one of those weird ways that comes from nowhere, that Jalili is Ayatollah Khamenei's candidate. I haven't seen any evidence that points one way or another to Jalili or to Velayati or to Ghalibaf.
Yeah, I think it's wishful thinking because people would like Jalili to be removed as the chief nuclear negotiator in hopes that those negotiations would finally be able to make some progress. But I agree, no, I don't think he's I mean, if you rig the game by having only people loyal to you run, then it absolutely doesn't matter which person emerges. And I think what we've seen, we had a practice run for this, which was the parliamentary elections last year. Very, very carefully controlled, conducted in an atmosphere of very high security vigilance. Internet slowed down, people were arrested, newspapers were closed, and we're already seeing the same pattern now, so that the atmosphere is such that there will not be large demonstrations. I even read yesterday that there won't be any televised debates. So there isn't going to be much opportunity for the public to get really excited or engaged, even if there was a candidate among the 8 that somehow suddenly seemed more charismatic than the others. And so the game is rigged, and one of these individuals will come forward and will be, the Supreme Leader assumes, loyal to him.
Very good. Let's open the floor to your questions, and we have people in the overflow. We'll take their questions too. Yes, please. Just wait for the mic, identify yourself, and speak loud.
Okay,
please.
I'm Faye Moqtader, private citizen, a member of NIAC. I have a question for Ali. There's a lot of scenarios that, with the drama that always folds the Iranian election, there's a scenario that whoever is going to be the new president of the Islamic Republic is here to make a change, and that is the attractive platform that they use, that I'm here to make a change, make a economy to improve, develop a relation with the West. And I think there is a scenario that talks about the fact that Khamenei wants to be the one who gets that credit. And one of the reasons that Rafsanjani was disqualified was the fact that they were afraid that if he gets elected, he's there to make a change, and Khamenei will be undermined, his power will be undermined. And he is actually willing to make the change.
And we have just questions, no comments.
Okay.
please.
So do you think he was disqualified because of the fact of the change that he was going to bring to the West?
I think when the history of the story of this revolution is written in the future, it will be a story of rivalry and competition between these two founding fathers of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khamenei and Rafsanjani. They had two very different visions for the system. And differences started to emerge when Rafsanjani became president and Khamenei became supreme leader. Basically, Rafsanjani wanted to change the system, wanted to reform the system, wanted to adapt a China model, and Khamenei more or less wanted to continue on the same path. So you had the difference between the path of development and the path of preserving the principles. And Ayatollah Khamenei has been quite open and frank about his differences with Rafsanjani. He said it in 2009. And let me, from here, maybe say a few words about implications for domestic and foreign policy even. I think we know after years of experience with the supreme leader at the pinnacle of power in Iran, that no matter who comes into office, he has such an immense institutional power that at the end of the day, he can implement and push forward his own vision for the system. So what I think the leadership in Tehran is looking for now, this time, is someone who can implement the vision of the supreme leader, especially as this might be his final years in power. And in that sense, I think the core of the policy, the foreign policy, domestic policy, will remain the same. But the tone and maybe even the team, now you can say nuclear negotiating team or team of people running domestic affairs, the economy, can definitely change and will change. But at the end of the day, I think the core of the policy will remain unchanged because the supreme leader is the decision maker, and because some of the issues that we're dealing with are so complex that they can't be resolved even if you had Rafsanjani sitting in the office of the president, because look at the sanctions regime. They're so complex and multi-layered that there's no way that you can roll them back in a speedy way. And the same applies to the nuclear program. They're so complicated. And there's so many layers into it that, again, rolling it back is going to be extremely difficult. The mistrust between Iran and the West, Tehran and Washington in particular, is not going to go away anytime soon. And it's not going to be diminished absent of a significant step by either party, which at this stage appears unlikely. So again, I don't think that this presidency will significantly change things, but at the end of the day, tone matter in diplomacy, and the team of that the president will bring with him to the office also matters. If there are more technocrats or more ideologues, it will have an impact on nuclear negotiations and on running the country. That's, again, experience that we had with Ahmadinejad, rattling the bureaucracy and creating a lot of economic problems independent of sanctions.
Barbara, a question from the overflow. How can candidate argue for economic improvement without parallel improvement in relations with the US-EU sanctions?
Yeah, that's a core question, and it's why I was not that excited about Rafsanjani, because I mean, ultimately it is up to the supreme leader whether Iran is going to make more of an effort to reach an agreement with the United States and the rest of the P5+1. And absent that, we are going down a path of increasing isolation, and I don't see that anyone is going to be able to fix the Iranian economy. It's been very convenient in a way that Ahmadinejad has been there, because he's been so objectionable in so many ways that he's a convenient scapegoat now for a lot that's gone wrong in Iran over the last 8 years. Without Ahmadinejad, and as the base of power of the regime gets narrower and narrower, I think the regime does have real legitimacy issues because everything really is going to be on the supreme leader. He is responsible now for the state that Iran is in. I don't know who is going to be his cover, who's going to be his foil, but certainly the next person is not going to be as flamboyant, I would think, as Ahmadinejad. So that could pose some problems, actually, for the regime.
Meir, can any just
It's extremely important to think about what's happening to the economy, and that's the Achilles heel of the Islamic Republic. This is extremely important, and I think Ayatollah Khamenei, one of the reasons why he did not choose Mr. Rafsanjani was that today we see an increasing involvement of the IRGC, of the Revolutionary Guard, in Iran's economy. Mr. Rafsanjani and the Revolutionary Guard have got not a very good history together. Since the end of the war between Iran and Iraq, the IRGC blamed Mr. Rafsanjani of basically tricking them to convince Supreme Leader to stop the war, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini. And I think, again, if Rafsanjani would have been allowed to run, that would have created more frictions. But in terms of what is going to happen, I think what's really important for the Supreme Leader is to continue with the status quo for now, as my colleagues, as Ali and Barbara quite rightly pointed out. But I think Iran is making a last push. I'm not going to say that they're going to surrender anytime soon, but I think Ayatollah Khamenei needs to show muscle, needs to show that he's not for now backing down for his own audience, because the nuclear program is becoming one of the most expensive projects in Iranian history. I mean, if I can just use one crude example. I did a calculation in my class today. Let's just say out of that $250 billion that Iran owes, the government owes the contractors and the bankers, let's just say half of that is caused by the nuclear program. So it's what, $125 billion. There's 184 kilograms of enriched uranium being produced at 20%. So that means each kilo of that enriched uranium costs something like $600 million. This has got to be probably the most expensive chemical in the world that's being produced today. And the leadership is stuck as to what to do with it. If they make a bomb, they could get attacked. And if they make a compromise, they may be seen as being too weak too soon. So I think this is going to be the biggest challenge of Ayatollah Khamenei. I think he will try to make a push to see if the Europeans can withstand living without Iran's oil. But if that doesn't work, then I think it's going to be a difficult situation for him. That's why he needs a loyalist by his side.
Okay. Question from yes, please. Can you wait for the mic, please?
Hello, I'm Kevin Lees. I write a foreign policy blog, Suffragio. I'd like to hear just from the panel, this is a general question for the panel, about where the liberal, reformist, and the moderate supporters go from here. Ali mentioned that he thinks that they'll eventually coalesce behind Rouhani, who's close to Rafsanjani and is a former nuclear negotiator. Do you think that former President Mohammad Khatami will eventually get behind him as well, or behind his former Vice President Aref, who is also qualified on Monday? Do you think that there's a chance that if the entire sort of moderate and reformist crowd gets behind one candidate, he'll actually have a chance in June?
I think the reformists are between a rock and a hard place. They're facing a huge dilemma. If they enter the game and they support Rouhani or Aref or any other candidate, it would undermine their credibility in the sense that none of their preconditions has been met by the establishment. Mousavi and Karoubi remain in prison. Rafsanjani was disqualified. If you look at the city council elections that are happening in parallel to the presidential election, most reformist candidates have been disqualified. So if they participate in the game, it would be kind of an acknowledgement of this electoral process. But at the same time, if they don't participate, if they abstain, it would signify the end of their political life. That's what happened. We have many precedents for that. Actually, the Nehzat Azadi, or the Free Liberation Movement. and many others, when they left the game, the door was shut permanently. So that's why the reformists have always tried to at least have a foot in the door, and have tried to vote or somehow to participate at lower levels. So we have to wait and see what happens.
I think the turnout's going to be very, very low. And I think the government will inflate the figures. That's what they did during the parliamentary elections. There was a joke that went around saying that 80% of Tehranis were sitting home watching 70% vote on television. So I think you're going to see the same kind of phenomenon with the presidential elections. It's going to be a very, very meager turnout.
In terms of the reformists, to be honest, I agree with both what was said by Ali and Barbara again. I just think that their days are gone. I don't see them being allowed out into Iranian politics, being given more power. Unfortunately, I don't hold much hope for them.
Process of election is also very important, and Iran has been very good to hold its parliamentary and presidential election on time and stick to the constitution, 2 terms for the president, not more, and so on. And for the supreme leader, the participation, a large participation of people is equally important. Would that be a reason why, the Guardian Council, who knows more or less how the supreme leader thinks and wishes, would allow that there is going to be a centrist, quote unquote, candidate running against whoever is a conservative candidate, and to make sure that a lot of people who would have stayed out would just come and take part in this election or not?
Look, a lot's going to depend on the nature of the campaign
Let's say
that's permitted.
hypothetically
That's
it's
permitted. As I mentioned, there was a report yesterday that there won't be any televised debates. Will they allow large public rallies? What got people all excited and enthusiastic in 2009, it was a party atmosphere. All the kids came out on the streets, and every night was a party up and down Valley Asr. And for those of you who've been in Iran, you know that any excuse for young people to come out on the streets and have a good time, whether it's an election or Ashura or a World Cup victory or something like that, people take that opportunity. So given the security framework now in which the regime is, there were police, security people out on the streets just for the announcement by the Guardian Council. They were afraid that there would be protest demonstrations because of the disqualifications of Rafsanjani and Mashai. So given this mentality, it's hard for me to imagine that there are going to be large, boisterous public rallies with music and young people. And so if you don't have that enthusiasm, you're just not going to have the turnout. It was, 85% in 2009, which was a record. And with large turnout comes the possibility of demonstrations turning into protests. And also it comes the likelihood of an emotional letdown once the results are announced. And I think that the system, the Nizam, wants to prevent that kind of emotional roller coaster, so they're going to keep it flat, perfectly flat, which means low turnout and a loyalist at the end of it.
Well, I think I agree with Barbara, but I think one factor that we have to take into account here is that, as I mentioned, this is going to happen in parallel with city council elections, and city council elections in which I think you have more than 1 million candidates. That's already a huge part of the electorate. The candidate.
Yeah, but you said most of the reformists were disqualified. So
right, but it's not only the local elections are not only about the reformists. They're motivated by local issues, tribal issues, family issues. And I think in that sense, probably they will have an acceptable turnout rate, and then perception is reality at the end of the day. So it would be a war of images. Opposition would say that the turnout was very low, and the government would say that the turnout was very high.
I think what the government will probably do is in each governmental office they have a department called Perasat, which job is basically to preserve the revolution. They had it in the old Soviet days. They had the Communist Party had its own representative and bureau in major government offices. And I think, in these elections, the government is going through this department in major government offices through Herasat to ensure that people are going to turn up, those who work at least for the government. In terms of the city council elections, I'm not so sure that, from my understanding, that it is such an important issue for the people or the government. We have to remember that the government already postponed these elections once, and I think, if you ask the average Iranians who is your city councillor and who you're going to vote for, do you really know them? I'm not so sure that there's so much an enthusiasm and time spent researching the city council people. And I think the biggest reason why probably people are going to vote is going to be, number one, is going to be the loyalists, which of course the regime has. But in other cases, I think people are just going to be worried about their jobs. And if they don't vote, it could affect their prospects.
Meir, I beg to disagree with you, because I think city councils are very important for small cities, small towns, and in the provinces, not maybe for Tehran, but in the small cities, in the provinces, the city council is important, and it makes a difference who is elected to that council. Yes, please. Let's take that question from there.
I'm Reza Vaez, formerly from IMF. Well, if we agree with this interesting analysis of the panelists, we are going to have somebody elected who will be very close to Khamenei, and life will go on as usual, nothing will change, and so on. But is this a realistic thing? I mean, given the economic situation in Iran and all the international sanctions and all the pressures which is on the incoming government, do you expect any changes of significance to happen, whoever is the new president, whether it is very close to Khamenei or not? And do you think people would just sit there and just be submissive to whatever happens?
Well, I think that elections do give an opportunity to the supreme leader to change course if he wants to. And if, it is easier in some ways. You'll have a new president coming in. He announces a new cabinet and a new series of policies. So it does provide an opportunity. But it's hard to be very optimistic about a major change of course on the nuclear front. Jalili, of course, is talking about a policy of resistance, and he thinks that his strategy is working extremely well because the offers from the P5+1 are getting slightly better over time, and he thinks that if Iran just holds fast, that the West will somehow come crumbling and will accept Iran's terms. We also have the possibility that Iran will actually develop nuclear weapons in the next year, and that would certainly change the picture a great deal. They're getting awfully close in terms of the amount of fissile material that they have. So I'm not inside the supreme leader's head. I don't know if that's his strategy. The situation is certainly very, very bad. But Iran has a capacity to go on. It has substantial resources internally. It's largely food self-sufficient. It's able to still sell some oil. It still made, $70 billion last year, which was not bad. So, the supreme leader has shown himself to be very cautious about radical change. And I would see the system basically going on like this as long as he is the supreme leader of Iran.
Now, I think, and again, this is coming from the supreme leader because he's very outspoken and he doesn't hide his points of views on these issues. I think he believes that in crisis there is opportunity. And now there's an opportunity for Iran to once and for all detach its economy from oil and develop what it calls the economy of resistance. And he thinks the situation is sustainable, at least in the short term. So he wants a president who can implement that plan. Doesn't necessarily wants a president who's not always fighting with the parliament, is able to manage what he wants in an efficient way. But here I think we have a dilemma in terms of if the supreme leader gets, which is very likely that he will get, his own candidate, his loyal candidate in office, will he become emboldened and think that his house is in order now. He has a unified government, so he's in a better position to make a compromise? Or will he decide now that I have no rivals in the system, I can resist even more? I think at this stage it's difficult to say, but it also depends on external factors. And there are two factors here that I can see. One is what will happen in the transition, because don't take it that this transition will be smooth and easy. From Ahmadinejad to the next government. The other one is, what would the other side do? How would the West play its role? And I just give you a few timelines and milestones. When Iran is conducting its elections in June, there's this conference on Syria in Geneva. And if Iran is invited or excluded, it would send a completely different message to the Supreme Leader and to the next administration in Tehran. Then in July, you will have sanctions that were enacted in January, National Defense Authorization Act of 2013, who will come into play. And then in September, as the new president takes office, probably you will have a new round of US sanctions, even UN sanctions. And these will all impact how the new president and how the Supreme Leader can manage the nuclear crisis. And without solving the nuclear crisis, it's unlikely that there would be any improvement in the economic situation.
Meir?
In terms of the economy, I think our friend from the IMF asked that question, so I suddenly remembered the subsidy reform program, which I think has been something that the IMF has been recommending Iran to do, to reduce the subsidies, and this is something that President Ahmadinejad implemented, of course, with the approval of the Supreme Leader. I see some changes there because President Ahmadinejad, while he reduced the subsidies, the money that was saved, he was supposed to invest part of it, at least in Iran's industries, and he didn't do that. And I think it's possible that in order to help the Iranian economy survive what's going to be the gold sanctions that's going to come in July, that's going to hurt Iran even more, because not only Iran can't get money anymore for selling oil, it can't get gold anymore, and it's going to hurt especially its business dealings with the Turkish, who've been supplying Iran with gold, and this is going to make it even more difficult for Iran to earn income from its oil. So I think we're going to see some kind of reform being done in the subsidy reform program that's been carried out. But in terms of what will happen in the nuclear program, to be honest with you, I think this is something that I think is going to take another number of years. I think we're going to have to wait to see if the Supreme Leader is going to change. I think his decision whether he's going to change or not is going to be how much can Iran's economy withstand the current sanctions.
Okay. Thank you. I think that no matter how close the president is to the Supreme Leader, the office of the presidency, no matter whether it's in Iran or anywhere else, will have some power and some clout. And the next president of Iran might decide that he may not have a say on the nuclear issue, but he will have a say on some of the domestic issues, and might try and open up the social scene a little bit, just to appease the people, might decide that, to open up the press a little bit, to do something, because at the early stage, every president, I think, has 6 months' time to make some changes, and if it is sort of incremental steps, modest thing, he might succeed. But if not, when it comes to big issues, I think it is, as you said, as the panel said, it's the Supreme Leader who has to make the ultimate decision, and he's not going to change 100% and drastically. Please join me in thanking our panel. Meir, thank you very much.
Thanks, Meir.
Lunch is served outside, please. In Iran, we serve lunch between 1:30 and 2, so we wanted to serve lunch
Thanks,
today.
Yeah.
No. Thank you.
You know, some things actually have relaxed already. I mean, the last time I was there, the clothing is getting more outrageous. So